The first sign of something wrong wasn't the cold. Folks out here were used to cold. They'd face snow that creaked like dry wood, ice that split wagon wheels, frost that climbed in through the window cracks. But this was different. The sky had gone a flat gray the week before, like the color had drained out of it, and by the third day the wind stopped moving entirely. That silence spooked more people than the snow ever did. No rustle in the pines, no whistle through the eaves, just stillness. Then the birds vanished, and the first dogs started dying. It was in that hush that young Amos Helton burst through the church doors during Sunday service, snow clinging to his boots, lips blue, and fingers curled like talons. "Mrs. Monroe's still got heat," he rasped, pointing toward the bluff. "I felt it. Swear on Pa's grave." Nobody moved at first. It was too absurd a claim. Mrs. Monroe? Widow that lived alone in that sagging timber house at the edge of the Cedar Ridge. Her husband had died 6 years back. She hadn't stepped foot in town more than twice a season since. Nobody even knew if her well still ran. Now here, Amos stood, hands shaking, face pale with cold and fear, claiming she had warmth. Only 2 people left the pews right then: Sheriff Halcombe, whose right hand had turned black from frostbite 2 days before, and Preacher Barrett, whose baby girl had died that morning in the cradle, skin stiff and gray. The rest stared after them, unmoving, as the wind finally stirred again and carried with it the smell of smoke. The snow hadn't stopped in 3 weeks. People had tried every trick they knew, burning damp pine branches, crowding into one room, stuffing rags in cracks, keeping animals inside for body heat. But the cold didn't act right. It came from the ground this time, from beneath the floorboards, up through boots and rugs, curling around ankles like a fog no fire could chase off. The smoke from stoves didn't rise. It sank, chimneys clogged with icicles from the inside. A newborn calf froze standing up. No one could explain it. By the time word of the widow's cellar spread through the valley, 6 cabins had already collapsed under the weight of snow. 6 more sat empty, their families having taken to the woods to seek shelter in caves or ravines. Those who stayed in town gathered in the old Granger barn, setting up hay for bedding, clinging to cows and dogs like lifelines, and yet children still died in their sleep, lips blue, eyes wide open. The cold crept in, no matter what, which is why by the 4th day, nearly everyone followed Amos and the sheriff up the bluff. They reached the Monroe place at dusk, their breath coming in short puffs, eyes watering against wind so sharp it peeled skin off cheeks. The house looked worse than they remembered. Wood warped, chimney slumped, porch half buried under snowdrift. But the smoke rising from behind the house was real, steady, blue-gray, and warm-smelling, hickory. And more than that, the ground itself wasn't frozen. That's what Preacher Barrett noticed first. He knelt and touched the soil beneath the porch steps. Mud, not ice. He fell to his knees and wept. No one dared knock. They just waited, gathered in a tight crowd, breath fogging, watching the door. Sheriff Halcombe stepped forward finally, removed his hat with his left hand, his right useless now, tucked into a sling, and opened the door. Warmth hit them instantly. Not heat like a fire, deeper, radiant. It didn't blast out. It wrapped, damp air, earthy and rich, a scent like stew, smoke, moss, and something faintly metallic. Candles flickered along the stairwell leading down, and at the top stood Widow Monroe. She didn't smile, just looked over them with tired eyes and nodded once. "Don't speak, not yet," she said. "Come in quick, leave the door shut behind you." They came in silence, all of them. 32 souls, stomping snow off boots, hugging themselves. Children were carried. Old men leaned on daughters, and Widow Monroe turned and led them down into the cellar without another word. The cellar shouldn't have existed. That's what struck everyone first. It wasn't just large, it was cavernous. The floor was compacted clay, dry and warm underfoot. Stone walls, smoothed by hand, lined with shelves of canned fruit, smoked meat, pickled vegetables. A spring trickled in one corner, feeding a trough. A clay oven glowed in the far wall, its draft channel carved into the stone itself. Above, the ceiling arched like a tunnel, reinforced with timber thicker than railroad beams. And heat, not from a fire, but from the very walls, from the stones. Gentle, constant warmth. No smoke, no burning logs, no firelight dancing, just warmth. "How?" began Sheriff Halcombe, but Monroe held up her hand. "You'll speak when I say, or else I send you back out." Her voice was like grit, worn thin. He nodded. They all did. Only after the last person entered, and the heavy cellar door closed behind them, did she speak again. "I'm not going to explain it all. You wouldn't believe me anyway, but I'll say this. This cellar was dug by my husband the year after we lost our first son. He called it the return. said winters were changing, said the cold would one day eat from the inside. He started digging, hauling stone, mixing clay with straw, building by candlelight. Folks laughed, even I did, for a time. He kept at it, said heat could be caught, stored, held, not just with fire, but with layers, with stone and water and air moving right. She walked over to the oven, touched it with bare fingers. He died before he finished, but I knew what he meant, and I kept digging. Silence. Then a child began to cry softly in her mother's arms, and the widow moved quickly, bringing broth in a clay bowl. Nobody left that night, nor the next. By the end of the first week, the cellar held 54 people. More arrived each day, stumbling through wind and white, drawn by rumors of a miracle. Monroe let them in, one by one, but not without rules. No loud talking, no idle chatter, no fighting. Everyone worked, stirring pots, hauling snow to melt for drinking, helping bury the dead when the cellar air grew too thick with grief. The heat never ran out, even when the wind shrieked like an animal and snow blanketed the windows above so thick the house disappeared. Even when the roof groaned and cracked, even when the last fire in town went out, people began to call it the Earth's womb, a half-joking term at first, then whispered with reverence. Children stopped coughing, skin turned pink again. A baby was even born in the corner, wrapped in sheepskin, laid in a basket of warm clay bricks. But it could not last, because on the 14th night, Widow Monroe collapsed by the oven. Her hands were blistered raw, her breathing shallow, and as Preacher Barrett knelt beside her, she whispered something that made his face turn pale. She said, "The heat's not endless," he told the others. "She's been feeding it, not just with wood, with layers, dirt, blood. She's been keeping it going at a cost." No one knew what that meant, not yet, but the cellar grew colder the next day, and by the third day, they heard a knock at the cellar door, not from outside, from the stairs above. Something, or someone, was up in the ruined house, and the snow had buried every path in or out. They were not alone anymore. The knock didn't come again, just once. 3 firm raps, then silence. But that single knock unraveled every scrap of peace the cellar had managed to build over the past 14 nights. The children stopped playing. Conversations hushed. Even the faint simmer of broth in the great clay oven seemed to quiet, as if the air itself had drawn still in fear. Widow Monroe had not stirred since the collapse. She lay bundled in wool and wrapped in sheepskin, her chest rising shallow, her mouth drawn tight as if still whispering secrets into the stone. Whatever strength she had kept hidden these weeks had fled all at once, and with her silence a terrible question hung in the air. What was now upstairs? Sheriff Halcombe was the first to move. He reached instinctively for his sidearm, but there was none. He'd lost it weeks ago, traded it for dry socks and a jar of lard. Instead, he lifted a thick stick from the wall, hardened pine used for stirring coals, and held it like a club. "I'll go," he said, but Barrett blocked him. "You ain't got your hand. You ain't got your breath either. And if it's frost-mad scavengers, or worse, we'll lose more than our only lawman." A few murmured agreement, but most said nothing. Their eyes were fixed on the steep clay stairs that led to the house above. The door remained shut, the iron latch unmoved, but that didn't ease the dread. The knock had come from inside the house, and the only other way in, through the main entrance outside, was snowed under by 8 feet of frozen weight. "There's no way anyone climbed through that," whispered Letty James, a mother of 4 whose husband had frozen mid-sentence while chopping wood. "No man, no animal could crawl through that kind of cold." "It wasn't a man," said her eldest boy, eyes wide. "Didn't sound like it. Sounded like wood knocking wood." "Shut your mouth," Letty hissed, pulling him close. But she wasn't alone in the thought. Some said it was the wind, others said it was the old roof beams shifting under snow. But most, even if they didn't say it aloud, had started to wonder what price Monroe had truly paid to keep this place warm, and if that warmth, so steady, so unnatural, was starting to crack. That night no one slept, and the next morning the oven didn't light. 3 days passed, the cellar grew colder. The clay beneath their feet no longer felt soft. It held a chill now, like the skin of something long dead. The spring in the corner slowed to a trickle, and Monroe remained unconscious, her body warming no more than the stones around her. Still, no one left, because there was nowhere to go. Outside, the freeze had become absolute. Those who ventured upstairs to check the walls found the door frozen shut, rimmed with a crystal-like sheen that pulsed slightly when touched. Not just ice, something else, something like glass, but wet to the touch, that coated the windows and spread like veins through the beams. And above the trapdoor to the house, black footprints. Not mud, not soot, but something darker, like ash that stuck to skin. Sheriff Halcombe ordered the door barred from below. No one objected. But that night, the knocking came again. Not loud, just steady. 4 knocks this time. Slow, deliberate, and then a voice, not a whisper, not a moan, a voice unmistakably human. "Open up," simple as that, a woman's voice, calm, unhurried, but not Monroe's. Barrett fell to his knees at the sound. "That's my wife," he whispered. "She died last week. That's Sarah's voice." Letty James screamed. Her boy clung to her, but even he couldn't stop shaking. "She's calling me," the boy said. "My pa, he's up there." Then another voice joined, a child's, then another. Soon, the stairwell echoed with voices, familiar ones, lost ones, a dead brother, a missing daughter, a drowned husband, calling, beckoning. One by one, people turned away, hands to ears, weeping. Others moved toward the trapdoor. Sheriff Halcombe had to tackle one man, old Jeb Callister, who tried to pry the latch open with a rusted spoon. "They're alive!" Jeb shrieked. "They're alive up there!" But they weren't, and by morning, Jeb was dead, frozen in place. No one had seen him move during the night, but when they awoke he was stiff as driftwood, his back against the cellar wall, a look of peace on his face. The spring had stopped, flowing. On the 6th day since the first knock, Monroe awoke, barely. Her eyes opened, milky white now, as if burned blind, and her lips cracked as she whispered. "They're testing the seal," she said. Barrett leaned close. "What seal? What's doing this? What did you build here?" Monroe coughed, blood flecking her chin. "Not what I built. What I kept sealed." She motioned weakly to the clay oven. "He dug too deep, my husband. Found something under the rock shelf. A chamber. Old. Older than the ridge. Older than any of us. Said it breathed heat. Said it remembered." She tried to sit up, but collapsed again. "I thought he was mad. Until the first winter it stayed warm. Until the animals started dying outside. Until I saw it glow." Barrett swallowed hard. "Saw what?" Her fingers tightened around his coat. "The stones." She passed out again. And this time the oven glowed faintly red, without flame, without fuel, and the voices upstairs began to scream. Sheriff Halcombe had always been a practical man. He believed in cold, steel, blood, and boot leather, but nothing in his 30 years prepared him for the things he heard that night. They weren't voices anymore. They were pleading. They were chanting. He heard his mother's voice, dead 20 years now, saying his name in the old way, drawing it out like a lullaby. He bit his own tongue to keep from answering. Others weren't so strong. 3 more tried to open the door. One nearly made it. The latch cracked. Cold wind spilled down the stairs like a lung exhaling from the earth's throat. It took 3 men to pull it shut again, and all the while, the oven pulsed. Barrett knelt beside it, touching the clay. "It's not fire," he said. "It's drawing from below, feeding on something deeper." He turned to Halcombe. "If it runs out, if the warmth fails entirely, they'll get in." "You mean the cold?" Halcombe asked. But Barrett didn't answer, because Monroe was awake again, eyes wide, teeth chattering. "It's not the cold knocking," she said. "It's the hollow." She motioned for them all to gather. Her strength was failing fast, but she forced the words out like nails. "There's a passage beneath the oven. Hidden. He dug it, built the oven over it, said if it ever got too strong, if the seal weakened, someone had to go down and close it again." Halcombe frowned. "Close what?" But Monroe was already slipping back into unconsciousness. Barrett stared at the oven. "I think we have to go under it." By morning, 4 men and Barrett were digging behind the oven. They removed bricks carefully, exposing a hollow space behind the stone. What they found wasn't a tunnel. It was a hole, perfectly circular, no tool marks, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. And from below, the heat, not warm air, breathing heat, rhythmic, like a sleeping thing. Barrett volunteered, said no one else should go, said he had nothing left to lose. He tied a rope around his waist, took a lantern, kissed a photograph of his dead wife, and disappeared into the dark. They waited an hour, then 2, then the rope went slack. No tug, no signal. Sheriff Halcombe wanted to pull it up, but as soon as they began to lift, the rope burned hot in their hands, so hot it seared skin. Then the trapdoor above slammed open. No knock, just a violent shrieking wind that tore down the stairs like fire. People screamed. The heat vanished all at once. Candles blew out, children wailed, and above them, for the first time, they heard footsteps descending the stairs. Heavy, slow, too many feet. Sheriff Halcombe shouted for the door to be blocked. Men threw crates, barrels, anything they could find. The oven glowed white. Monroe screamed in her sleep, and from the hole behind the oven, a sound rose. Not a voice, not an echo. A wordless calling. Something had awakened, and Barrett had not come back. The light died fast. It wasn't the kind of darkness you get from blown-out lanterns or heavy snowfall. This was deeper, saturated. It pressed against the skin like wool soaked in river muck. The second the trapdoor above burst open, all flame vanished. Not flickered, not dimmed. Vanished. Every candle, every oil lamp, even the glow from the oven extinguished in a single blink, as if a breathless hand had swept across the entire cellar at once. A collective gasp choked the air, followed by chaos. Children screaming, bodies stumbling into each other, cries for names and shouts for light that never came. And the footsteps continued, measured, deliberate, uneven, a dragging sound, then another, then dozens more. No one could see, but they could hear the weight of something descending the narrow wooden stairs, something with more legs than it should have had, something too tall to fit a man's body, and too wide to slip through the frame without crushing timber. But there was no splintering, only the sound of descent, step after step, creaking wood, claw or bone-scraping stone. Sheriff Halcombe gripped a child to his chest and back toward the far wall, his numb fingers searching for anything, a brick, a stick, a tool, anything to use. But nothing mattered now. Whatever was coming didn't fear violence. It didn't even notice it. A hum began to rise from the trapdoor, a low, trembling frequency that hit deeper than the ears. Teeth ached, joints locked. Some fell to their knees, others clawed at their temples, screaming, trying to force out a pressure that refused to be borne. It was music, but not the kind made by strings or throat. It was like a mountain groaning beneath the crust of the earth. It spoke in rhythms too slow to understand, and yet too terrible to ignore. And then it stopped. One last footstep, then stillness, no more movement, no breath, no sound at all, until a sudden flash cracked the darkness in half. The oven erupted with light. It wasn't flame, it was memory. Visions tore through the room like wind-ripping paper. A cabin built in summer, bare hands dragging stones from a creek bed, a young man shaping clay with blistered palms, then darkness again, followed by screaming, so much screaming, and a black hole that burned with heat but consumed without light. Hands reaching down, fingers clawing out, something pulled from below, something made of heat and hunger, and just as suddenly, the visions stopped. Everyone lay where they'd fallen. A child sobbed quietly in the corner. A woman whispered prayers to a god that hadn't visited these hills in years. Sheriff Halcombe crawled toward the oven, his boots scraping over brittle clay. The bricks glowed dimly now, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. He looked into the hole behind it, praying Barrett would appear. Nothing, only the breath of heat, steady and slow, but it was changing. The warmth that had once wrapped the cellar like a protective shawl now had sharpness to it, an edge like heated metal. It didn't comfort, it warned. Monroe stirred, her voice, ragged and cracked, barely reached them. "It's loose!" Halcombe rushed to her side. "What is? What came down the stairs?" Monroe tried to lift her head but failed. "Not down," she whispered. "Up! It was under us all along." He stared at her, confused. "You said it was sealed, beneath the oven." Her eyes fluttered open, dry and white. "That was just the breath hole, the top of it. My husband sealed the chamber below, poured clay, built walls, wove copper wire through stones like veins. He thought it would hold, but we've been feeding it, every night, with warmth, with blood, with grief. It's been feeding on us all this time. That seal's breaking. I can feel it inside my teeth." She gripped his collar with one clawed hand. "I thought I was keeping you warm, but I was letting it grow." Then her breath stopped. Widow Monroe died in Sheriff Halcombe's arms, her final exhale a thin wisp that smelled of scorched moss and wet stone. The heat from the oven vanished with her death. No more pulsing, no more light, just cold again. Real cold, honest cold. But above them, the voices returned. Not whispers now, screams. They didn't mimic loved ones anymore. They weren't trying to lure anyone. Now they howled, shouted, spoke in long, drawn phrases that had no language but all meaning. And the cellar door began to open. Slow, steady. They hadn't unbarred it. No one had touched it. It opened like something had pressed from behind. And once it was fully open, there was no one there. Just the stairwell, and at the top a glow, white, beckoning. Barrett appeared in the hole. He was alive, that much was clear, but he wasn't the same. His skin had turned pale, almost translucent, like river ice. His beard had gone white, even the patches that used to be red. His eyes glowed faintly, and his voice came soft, calm, like falling snow. "I saw it," he said. Everyone backed away. Barrett crawled out of the hole slowly, deliberately, not seeming to feel the heat that still lingered on the oven's stone. "It's not a thing, not a creature, not even a ghost. It's old heat, kept down so long it learned how to remember. Like how water remembers the shape of a clay cup, like a grave remembers the bones it once held." Letty James held her children tighter. "What do you mean, remember?" Barrett looked around, sorrow in his eyes. "I mean, it remembers us, all of us, our fears, our names, our dead, our warmth. It's shaped itself into what we lost." He turned to the oven. I tried to close it, but I couldn't. I saw her down there. Monroe's husband. What was left of him, or what it made from him. And the others, all the lost ones. He looked back to the trapdoor. They're in the house now, upstairs. They're waiting, not for us to come, for us to let them in. Then his eyes turned glassy, and he collapsed. They buried Monroe in the spring corner, under the last soft soil. The heat never returned, but neither did the screams. Whatever had risen to the trapdoor now lingered, silent, unseen. Some argued for escape, said they'd rather die in the snow than be eaten by a cellar ghost. Others refused to leave the walls that still kept them from freezing. Halcombe made his decision the next day. He would go upstairs. He asked no one to follow. Barrett tried to stop him, but Halcombe shook his head. You said it's shaped from our memories, from our dead. That means it has our weakness, but it also means it can be shown something else. He strapped on a scarf, lit a lantern with what little oil remained, and stepped onto the stairwell. Each step creaked. Each footfall felt like it might be his last. He reached the top, opened the trapdoor fully, and vanished into the white. They waited 12 hours, then 24. No return. The oven stayed cold. The wind upstairs quieted. And then something changed. The trapdoor shut itself, and this time it locked from above. The sound of the trapdoor locking echoed like a gunshot. It wasn't slammed. It wasn't forced. It was slow, intentional. A weight sliding into place. A wooden bar perhaps, or something heavier. But it locked. Firm. Final. And everyone in the cellar heard it. Letty James screamed. Barrett stood frozen, hand hovering mid-air, like he'd thought to rush the stairs, and stopped himself too late. No one else moved. They didn't have to. They all knew what it meant. Sheriff Halcombe wasn't coming back. Neither was the warmth. The silence afterward was unbearable. Even the children made no noise, the kind of stillness that made ears ring. The oven's faint glow had long gone out, and the breath from everyone's lips now steamed visibly, white plumes rising with every trembling exhale. The spring in the corner had iced over. Cracks bloomed along the clay floor like frostbite across flesh. The only movement was the slow curling of Monroe's shroud, drawn tighter by the cold. Barrett stood near the oven and said, "We have to finish what he started." He didn't shout it, didn't need to. He said it the way a dying man tells his son to close his eyes. Just the truth, just quiet. "There's no warmth left to offer," he continued. "No fire to tend. The seal's broken. But if we give it what it came for, if we let it feed in the way it's demanding, it won't stop. It will just keep remembering more of us, drawing more shapes. Our grief, our fear, it fuels it." A woman, young, wrapped in bear hides and holding a newborn, stepped forward. "What does it want then?" she asked. "You say it feeds on memory, on grief. We have more of that than wood. Is that why it started with warmth? To make us love it?" Barrett closed his eyes. "It made us need it, then it made us give to it. Voluntarily. It can't take anything unless we first try to keep it for ourselves. That's the law of old things. The oldest. You can't steal what's never been offered." The woman looked at her baby and stepped back. Barrett turned to the rest. "I'm going back down, into the hole." Several gasped. A few shouted, "No!" Others just stared. "I don't expect to return," he said. "But I saw the other side of the seal. Saw how Monroe's husband tried to close it. The copper veins, the carved markings. It was working. I think it just didn't have enough weight behind it." Letty spoke. "Weight? Sacrifice," Barrett said. "Not death, not pain. Something freely given. That's what it listens to. That's what holds it." He nodded toward the oven. "I'll need help removing more bricks. There's space below, deeper than I saw before. We didn't go far enough." They worked in shifts. There wasn't enough strength in any one man or woman to tear open the lower stone layers alone, not after weeks without proper food or rest. But desperation can lend strength like nothing else. With bare hands, they pulled apart what Monroe and her husband had built. Behind the second layer of clay was a vertical shaft, descending into blackness that breathed. It didn't feel like wind. It felt like pulse. The air below didn't move. It throbbed, with warmth, with memory, with grief. Barrett stripped to his undershirt, wrapped his wrists in linen, tied a rope around his waist, the same way he had before. But this time, no one would be holding the other end. He coiled the rope down after him, a symbolic gesture only. "If I reach the base and it's not sealed, I'll finish it," he said. "If I fail, don't try to pull me out. If you do, it might follow." They didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue about. He climbed down and was gone. 2 days passed. The temperature dropped again. A boy died, then an old woman, and a man who'd never woken after a faint cough in the night. The trapdoor remained locked above. No sound, no knock, no footsteps, no return of the warm glow in the walls. The cellar was turning into a tomb, and still Barrett did not come back. Then, on the third night, the oven cracked. Not a full break, just a fracture, thin and curved like a vein of quartz, splitting the front face of the clay oven with a loud snap. It echoed like a shot. Everyone ran to it, and behind the cracked clay, heat. It leaked out, not searing, but gentle, real, familiar, not the artificial warmth of before, not the breathing, beckoning glow. This heat was still, honest, silent, and with it came a single voice, faint, rising through the shaft Barrett had vanished into. His voice, done, then silence, and the crack in the oven closed. The next morning, the trapdoor unlocked. No footsteps. No voices, no glowing figures, just a soft click like a latch lifting itself. Sheriff Halcombe was there, but not as before. His body lay on the stairs, curled as if asleep, dusted in frost. His face was calm. His right hand, the one he'd lost to frostbite, was whole again, and folded in his pocket was a letter, scrawled in his own handwriting. Barrett read it aloud. If you're reading this, then it's finished. The seal is closed, not by violence, not by fire, but by return. That's the word that matters, return. The warmth was never ours. We tried to make it so. We fed it like a pet, and it learned too much. It learned our faces, our voices, our longing. Monroe kept us alive, but it cost her more than we knew. I offered myself not to it, but back to the thing it came from, the earth. I returned memory, returned fear, returned warmth, gave it all back. The cold you feel now is real. It's ours again, and we'll live with it, as we always have. Do not seek to light the oven again. Let it sleep, let it forget, and do not dig deeper. Halcombe. The survivors left the cellar that morning. There were 23 of them. They climbed through the broken shell of the house into sunlight. Real sunlight, soft and pale. The snow had stopped falling. The wind had calmed. The sky, for the first time in over a month, was blue. Some wept, some knelt. All were silent. The Monroe place stood in ruins. The porch had collapsed. The roof half caved. But the land around it, the ground, was warm, not burning, not strange, just warm, enough to walk barefoot, enough to bury the dead. They buried Monroe beside her husband. Barrett marked the spot with stones, and no one ever built on that land again. But for a long time after, every winter, someone would pass through town and ask about the cellar, ask if it was true, if it had really stayed warm through the worst freeze of '81. And every time the townsfolk would say the same thing. We don't talk about the Monroe cellar. Then they'd pause. But yes, it was warm. And some say, if you put your hand on the earth above it, you can still feel the last breath of heat rising from below. It wasn't just a story that stayed behind after that winter. It was a shape, a presence, not something you could draw or point to, not anymore. The house had caved in within 2 seasons. Rains wore away the exposed beams. Trees grew up through the rotted porch, and time, as it always does, tried its best to smother what had happened. But every so often, a child would wander too close to the ridge and come back quiet, not scared, just subdued, like something under the soil had whispered through their shoes. The cellar entrance was sealed for good. Barrett himself oversaw the burial of it. They filled the shaft behind the oven with rocks, clay, and lime, packed it layer by layer, mixing ash from the burned remains of the Monroe homestead into every inch. He sang while he did it, not hymns, not prayers, songs he half remembered from his youth when his mother used to hum beside the stove. "They're not for it," he told the others when they asked. "They're for me, to remind me of what's mine to remember." Because that's what the heat had taught him. That memory, when hoarded, could grow teeth. The town tried to move on. Spring came slow and harder than any in living memory. Most of the livestock had perished. The church had collapsed under snow weight. Over 30 cabins stood vacant, their families having either died or moved away. But those who remained, those who had lived in the Monroe cellar, shared a bond that words never touched. They didn't speak of the knocking or the voices or the way warmth had once pressed itself into their lungs like a second breath. But they did begin to build differently. No more thin-walled timber frames, no more fireplaces that sucked smoke into the rafters. They carved deeper, dug broader. They learned from what Monroe and her husband had done. Not the deeper parts, not the things Barrett warned against, but the basics. How to hold warmth without fire, how to use clay and stone and breath to shape shelter, how to stay alive when cold became not just an enemy, but a teacher. Barrett stayed for a while. He taught the children. He rebuilt the church himself, though he never preached. "I ain't fit for sermons," he said, "but I know a little about keeping things sealed." He carried a walking stick carved with symbols no one else understood, said it helped him remember the right things. He never climbed the ridge again. Others tried. A few boys, once they were grown, dared to poke around the old cellar site, but nothing remained. No trapdoor, no oven, just stones packed tight and deep, and a soft spot in the ground where snow melted faster than it should. Even decades later, old folks would visit that place in late winter, pressing their hands to the dirt. And always that question, is it still warm? Letty James remarried, had more children, but she never forgot what she saw in that cellar. She never let her children sleep above ground during winter, built her own home into a slope, deep and low, just To be safe, she'd say. When her oldest son asked her, late one night, what she remembered most from that time, she didn't speak of Monroe or the voices or the trapdoor that locked from the wrong side. She just said, the silence after. That's what I remember. He asked her why that mattered. She looked at the fire and said, because silence means it forgot, and forgetting was all we ever hoped for. The others passed slowly over the years. The old woman with the lambskin boots froze to death in a cave during a bad spring storm, refusing to take shelter in the new town hall, which she said was built too shallow. One of the Cellar boys, grown to a man with a family, drowned in the river while dragging stones down to build a new foundation for his barn. When they pulled him out, he was smiling. A child born in the cellar, the one wrapped in warm bricks and laid in the moss corner, grew up strange. She talked to trees. Her hands stayed warm even in snow. She never married, but she became the town's midwife, helping babies come into the world without fire. They all carried the story differently. Some buried it. Some whispered it to grandchildren. Some carved it into wood, never speaking aloud the words. But none of them denied it. Not after what they'd seen. Not after what they'd heard. Not after what they'd felt beneath the clay. Years later, after the last cellar survivor had died, a surveyor came through the valley, sent by the rail company, looking to lay new track. He came with charts and blueprints, markers and steel tape, but the locals wouldn't help him, wouldn't show him the old trails. He found the ridge himself, saw the flat patch of land, tested the soil. It's strange, he wrote in his report. The ground's warm here, even in January. No geothermal readings, no springs, just warmth. No wildlife nearby, no bird song, even the snow melts wrong. He recommended they route the track elsewhere, said the terrain wasn't cooperative. The company listened. The ridge remained untouched. The land was never settled again. But on cold mornings, if you walk that way and you press your hand to the earth, you'll still feel something. Not hot, not burning, just a hum, a breath, a memory waiting to fade. And every few decades, if the snow gets deep enough, if the silence returns the way it did in 81, someone swears they hear it. A knock, 3 times, then 4, and a woman's voice, quiet as dust. Don't speak. Not yet. Come in quick. Leave the door shut behind you. And that's why they say how a widow's secret cellar became the only warm place during the Great Freeze of 81 was never just a tale of survival. It was a warning, a record, a kindness offered, and a lesson paid for. And it's why the ground up there stays warm, because something remembers, something sleeps, and we don't dig there anymore.